Well, it's wonderful to be here with you all. I'm not doing a panel. I'm not doing a moderated event here. It's just me and my little office giving a talk. It's interesting. Anyone that watched the preceding session on this channel, you saw a whole group of people doing some amazing work in trying to diversify training and job placement, the real connecting the entire pipeline of education and inclusion into one. And it was so interesting for me to watch it because years ago, I was the chief scientist of a company called Guild. And what Guild was, in fact, our tagline was, we bring meritocracy back to technology. We take bias out of the hiring process. So the closing question from the last panel was, or one of them was about the use of artificial intelligence. And in fact, Guild, where I was chief scientist, was all about using artificial intelligence to try and transform hiring, to make it more inclusive. So much more difficult than we could possibly have imagined. My team worked incredibly hard to create some breakthrough technologies to be able to discover all of those people that didn't have the traditional credentials, but were still amazingly talented, either because they had astonishing potential or because they'd managed to realize that potential all on their own, but they just didn't have that Ivy League degree that so many hirers are looking for. And we know what the hiring experience has been for 100 years. In fact, people have been studying this, and for 100 years, we've seen that you get about 5 seconds. People look at your name and the school you attended and your last job. And based on those 5 seconds, maybe you get a deeper read. Maybe you get invited in for an interview. And it hasn't really changed for all of these years. So we, of course, we're going to be technology heroes. We were going to walk into hiring and education and transform everything, because we were building an AI-driven hiring platform in 2012 when no one was even thinking that this would be a possibility. And so we built these amazing tools to highlight why you should hire everyone. We found what was good about every candidate and tried to fit it into what our clients, our customers really needed. And then we did our user testing. Our user testing with all of the recruiters that were opening up our products. And while some of them were doing truly amazing work using the tools that we built, the vast majority of them would open up a profile in our system and they'd look at your name, your school, and your last job. And they would ignore everything that we built with our artificial intelligence. It was an incredibly hard lesson in a brutal truth, a truth which maybe isn't something that people are going to say very much at ASU GSV, but technology is inequality increasing because the people that need it the least are invariably the ones that benefit from it the most. And that's a hard thing to contend with, because I imagine almost all of us here have at least some degree of love for it. I've been building AI systems to solve challenging problems for more than 20 years. I live and breathe this stuff. I truly believe that technology can do good, and AI specifically can do good. But technology itself cannot solve our problems for us. Without that creative spark of an individual, technology simply becomes another tool that exists out in the world. And unfortunately, those tools are subject to the choices that everyone around us makes, everyone in our culture makes. In fact, my time at Guild reminds me of this story. I often tell, I'm going to skip it today, but you can probably go find it on YouTube. I've heard it is the coming thing in education. What that story was about was this guy named Jade, and Jade was amazing. And that story is about how we at Guild used our own technology to discover him. Jade, had never gone to university, even though he was an incredibly bright kid. No one in his family had. And so he chose a different path in his life. And I just remember after his first year at Guild as our lead front-end engineer, we were all sitting around just after the holidays, and he'd gone home back to LA from San Francisco for the holidays. And he came up and he told this story about time he was spending with his family and his friends. And how, it's like this classic story. His dad found out how much money he was making, in his monthly salary. And his dad was like, I've never made that whole month in my entire life. And you're making it on your first job. And Jade mentioned his friends, how they had pointed out that he was the first person from their neighborhood, first person that any of them knew that had a job as a software engineer in Silicon Valley, which seems like such a standard, almost canonical story of life in California. But in this case, Jade's last name was Dominguez, and his family just didn't come from a background, and his neighborhood had no examples of kids that had done this before. And that really sparked my imagination, because I had just read this research paper looking at a known phenomenon, something in fact that just like hiring has been studied for over 100 years. Students from underrepresented backgrounds, underrepresented at university, high performers, straight A's, high test scores, have this almost unique behavior compared to their high SES peers, high socioeconomic status peers. They choose not to apply to go to elite universities. They choose not to take scholarships that are actually offered to them. And that seems wildly irrational. And I am not saying that no one chooses to do so. There is a difference in this population, but there's this truly regretful behavior, a choice not to apply, a choice not to attend. And for 100 years, people have been debating, why do kids from these underrepresented backgrounds fail to participate, fail to make what seems like the rational choice? Well, for 100 years, one group of armchair philosophers had said, well, Black families are just culturally different than white families. So they make different choices. They prioritize family. You know how it goes. And another population says it's all economics. A Hispanic family, they need to stay home. They need to earn. Well, just before Jade came back and told his story about visiting with his friends in the neighborhood, I'd read this paper that did something that just seemed like the most rational piece of basic science you could imagine on this question. Why not compare the same population to the same population? Why not compare the underrepresented kids that go with the ones that don't, and see what's different between them, instead of comparing across completely different cultural and socioeconomic contexts? And what they found was, in analyzing dozens of possible variables, dozens of variables to explain why someone might go, economic variables, cultural variables, what they found is, amongst all of those, there was no difference between these kids. Culture, economics did not explain why these high-performing students chose not to go to elite universities. In fact, they only found 3 variables in total that correlated at all. And the number one, far and away, the biggest explanatory variable, someone from your neighborhood had gone before you. That was just like Jade's story. The whole time he was telling the story, I was thinking, you are now that person to every kid back in the neighborhood. Every one of your peers back there that had never heard of someone that had become a software engineer now knew of you. In fact, Jade and I ended up like the cover of the Sunday business section of the New York Times. I don't know how much more accepted by the institution you can get than some weirdo transgender woman and a guy named Dominguez representing technological transformation in the world. And that was an amazing thing to be a part of. And he became that person that everyone could know. Well, is that unique just to this context? Or in fact, is there a bigger trend here? Is this idea I was starting off with, that technology inevitably helps the people that need it the least and doesn't help anyone else quite as much, is that really something we have to accept? Or is it something that can be transformed? Well, let's start with another domain that's very well researched. After being an academic, I was a neuroscientist at Stanford and UC Berkeley, and mainly I fiddle around with computers because it turns out brains are really icky and messy, and if you just build fake ones on a computer, it is so much more beautiful. And my wife was faculty at the School of Education, and we had this idea I could mash up some, I guess mash up and brains is probably not the most pleasant metaphor, but I could mash up some of my machine learning and my neuroscience with her education research. And we thought hard about this project. Should it be a research experiment, or maybe it should be a startup? You know, we're in the Bay Area, at San Francisco and Berkeley. So we got the entrepreneurial bug and I started my first company, and it was brutal. I won't give you the whole spiel here, but let me just tell you the number of times a venture capitalist offered me money to fund my technology because they loved it. AI, as described by one venture capitalist, to give you a sense of how well they understood AI back then, his response was, "You can read students' minds? Well, here's $2 million. If you do financial fraud detection." Nobody wanted to fund education back then. Newton was the only major player in the startup world at the time. Coursera didn't exist. Khan Academy was finding out that no one wanted to fund education. And but it wasn't just that they wanted me to do something different. They wanted to fire me from day one, that I could not run my own company. And I heard it again and again. I've actually now founded 6 companies. I've been the chief scientist at 2 others. I sit on a number of boards. I can tell you in retrospect, I had a great business idea and I knew how to run it, but they couldn't see that. And this is something more generally in the experience of female executives that, again, we've known for 100 years. Well, maybe 100 is a big stretch just because it took a long time for women to really be a part of this whole process. But women leave the executive track, what's known as the pipeline issue, at vastly higher rates than men. By the way, of course, this is true of minority racial groups and disability status and other defining characteristics as well. But of course, it's very resonant here with women, particularly because you have this easy, unlike in other cases, this easy biological argument that you can make that women are fundamentally biologically different than men. And in fact, the overwhelming body of economic research about women and wage gap, this is the idea that women get paid less than men for doing the same job. And the overwhelming economic consensus seems to be that women make different choices than men do. Women don't work that extra hour late in the evening to finish a report. They don't put in the 2 hours over the weekend to polish up some emails. Women make different choices. It's not our fault. That amazing kid from Compton who should have gone to Caltech, he chose not to take the scholarship. It's not our fault. That woman we hired as a junior exec, we would have loved for her to stay. It's not our fault. She chose to leave. Women just biologically, they want to be moms. They want to leave. This is the argument. In fact, amazingly, this is the argument of most progressive economists as well. They just have a different prescription. More conservative economists think that's just the way the world is. Some women are exceptional and some are not. Whereas progressives say we need to make more space for women to include family in their lives. What if there was something very different going on? What if, much like those students, confronted with examples that their hard work could pay off at university, making a totally different choice about a scholarship? What if women also make different choices based on the world around them, the world that says that their hard work will pay off? So I'm a bit of a mad scientist. I love to take research from many different fields, mash it up with my machine learning, and see what kind of a crazy new experiment I can run. So I was really curious. I still had all of that data, 122 million people's worth of data from Guild. And I was really curious about this idea. If women choose to work less just because women making independent choices just don't want to put in those extra hours, shouldn't wage gap essentially be the same everywhere, but for a little random variability? Shouldn't it look the same at pretty much every company, maybe across every country? Well, we don't see that at all. Even if you look solely within one large country, like the United States or even Germany, you find that wage gap varies substantially across companies, far more than is plausibly explained by random chance. So what explains that difference? Why do some places have a much bigger wage gap than other for women? So I had this idea. I would build a bunch of little AI spiders. So these are little bots that crawl through websites. In this case, websites of 60,000 companies. And they would collect data for me that might be related to wage gap. All sorts of data, anything you can imagine that I might be interested. We went and pulled dozens and dozens and hundreds in the end of variables associated potentially with wage gap. So what was the gap? What was the variable that was the single best predictor of wage gap? A variable that stood out, just like someone from my neighborhood took a scholarship and went to university before me. It was the number of female faces in the pictures of the leadership team. So one of the little bots that I built from some experiences I had earlier in my career doing facial analysis were actually crawling through the bio sections of the leadership team, the C-suite, the board. This is much easier to do for public companies, but we had, of course, all of this data on the leadership teams from private companies at will with our fancy proprietary data at Guild. So I got to crawl through all of this data and make these predictions. And I will freely admit, I had a pretty strong hypothesis that I wanted to see tested. And sure enough, the more women were on the board, the more women were in the C-suite, smaller wage gap. Well, do we really know that this is causal? It could just be a correlation. There are all sorts of reasons, hidden variables that drive this. So one of the things I looked at was, well, did the company change the number of women in leadership? And do we see a consistent change within the first year after a leadership change, an expansion of the number of women? And what we found in particular was that when companies gained a female CEO or a CFO or similar business-related executive, wage gap dropped in the next year. Perhaps even more provocatively, it dropped even in the absence of any notable policy change. So changes in diversity inclusion spending, changes in explicit recruitment strategy. No, we didn't see that those were the causal drivers. Instead, it was representation. I put together a Bayesian model, but the most boring thing in the world to do is put a bunch of equations up on a screen and walk you through equations. So instead, let me describe this experientially. You've worked hard your entire life, worked hard as a young student to get into an elite university, worked hard at that university when perhaps your professors weren't giving you the same credit for the capabilities you had as your male peers, and you got an amazing job at an amazing company. And based on some of my other research on the taxon being different, you are working twice as hard as the guy next to you for the same outcomes. And then you look up, and there's no one like you and the leadership team. There isn't a single woman. And yes, I did this analysis solely on women, but let's stretch our imagination ever so much. There is not a single Black person on that leadership team. There is no one in a wheelchair. There is no one that's gone through gender transition. Pick your poison. We all are different in some way, but for some of us, this comes at a societal cost that is pronouncedly larger than for others. If you look up and you see no one like you on the leadership team, your brain does something funny, but also very rational. It starts to recompute all of the benefits of that hard work you're putting in. Little parts of your parietal lobes right back up here are starting to reassess that extra hour in the evening that you would have spent polishing a report. But you know what? Maybe I should put it into that nonprofit I was always thinking of starting. I could put those 2 hours into emails on the weekend, but is it really going to pay off? Or are the people around me going to get more breaks for the same effort? Why should I be working so hard? I'm not saying that women or those students were making explicit decisions, but I am saying that our brains are working through the likely payoffs of all of our choices. And they're finding that they just aren't as good as other choices we can make. I'm going to work hard no matter what. But why don't I put that hard work into things that are actually going to pay off in my life? In fact, there was a new and recent paper that brought this outside of the domain of some of my traditional research inside the United States. In this particular case, they were looking at affirmative action for low-caste students in India. I read through it, and I think we're explicitly talking about Dalit students, but I'm sure this generalizes to other populations. And they wanted to know if there was an affirmative action program for low-caste students for university admissions. Explicit spots at university reserved for these students that have, for literally centuries, been barred from participation in this form of elite education. Of course, the chance to go to university exists in theory for everyone. And every student in the US and in India can make that incredible bootstrapping effort to transform their lives. But what happens when you have concrete evidence? Maybe because someone in your university went before, maybe because there is someone in the leadership team of your company that looks like you, or maybe because there is a legal policy in place to assure that you have a shot at attaining that same university education as everyone else in your state or your country. What they found was that not only do those affirmative action spots at university increase academic performance for elite low-class students, but in fact, it increases participation in education. The number of years that students stick with their education by 18 months. So that's a year and a half of additional education, which particularly in rural contexts could be transformative in a kid's life. Now, all of these are cases where people were free to make any choice they wanted to. I think we all understand that in America, there is this vision that somehow you can choose to be beautiful and you can choose to be rich And choice, in fact, is a kind of a magic wand that transforms everyone. I love that I have an amazing freedom of choice. And in fact, the choice to be me is one of the most precious things I could ever have embraced. But understand that choice itself is fundamentally inequitably distributed, not just opportunity. When we build technology that can transform someone's life, and then we simply make it available in the world, even if you make it available for free, do you truly believe people will choose to make use of it? Will they choose to come to your YouTube channel? Will they choose to put your app on their phone? Will they choose to believe that their hard work will pay off? Everyone has so many choices in their lives. And if you've never known anyone to go to university, no one like you, why would you bother? You put your hard work someplace else. And unfortunately, everybody loses as a result. That was a hard thing for me to learn with my original ed tech company, was that it wasn't enough to build AI to help students learn at university, because most of the students that really needed our help had either been forced out or chosen to drop out long before they ever got to our technology. And then we worked on systems to take bias out of the hiring process, and the recruiters chose not to use it. Then I had this idea, well, let's make this as simple as possible. We'll just do text messages. We'll watch kids from migrant families in Texas, and we'll send text messages home to their families, specifically targeting things that we knew the families were capable of participating in. And we finally began to see some traction. When we finally acknowledged that we needed to frame not just the technology itself, not just the accessibility of the technology, but the reason it would make a change, the story, the why of our technology, in a way that resonated with those families. And the why we discovered was to learn from the little kids themselves. When they were young and in kindergarten, everything was fascinating. And all we had to do was let their parents know what fascinated your child today, and then give them a little something to talk to their child about. Now, I'm not going to say it was magical and transformative, but as an experiment, as one of our mad science experiments to look at what was possible, throwing out all the amazing things that one could have imagined artificial intelligence doing, and just focusing in on wonder and a parent's love for their child, produced a benefit that all the previous companies hadn't been able to achieve. You really want to bust through inequality in education and hiring. That's where we need to go. We need to get to the fundamentals of why people make the choices that they make. I have about 15 minutes left before someone, I think in a clown costume, will come out with a little broom and sweep me off the stage. Boy, I would love that. But what I want to talk about is what we're doing right now along these same lines. I've been an entrepreneur many times over again, and I love it. It's kind of addictive. I don't particularly care whether my companies make money. Don't tell any of the venture capitalists. But I love solving problems. And it's wonderful because in my life here at my philanthropy, Sokos Labs, we just get to do that for free. People bring us crazy problems and we try and solve them. But I know that for most people, the existing pipeline, the existing framework for how you can take your amazing potential out into the world and invent something completely new, build a company, create jobs, transform your community, your city, those existing systems are crucial. I wish they'd been there for me. I don't know why I was so stupid that I stuck through all the ridiculousness of venture capitalists patting me on the head and telling me I was so cute for wanting to start my own company, yes, I regularly wanted to punch people. In fact, across those 6 companies I founded, and the 2 times being a VC, you can imagine I've done a lot of pitches to venture capitalists. Not just the ones that succeeded, the many more that didn't. I have never pitched a female VC, not once. And all of the times someone was deciding whether to fund one of my companies was someone with voting control over that money, a woman. That's truly disturbing. The best of my recollection is that none of them were Black. I don't think that is the way we are ever going to figure out how to bring more people into a truly inclusive economy. And I wanted to do something about that too. I had found success in my own life, and I wanted the chance to share that. So one of the projects we're working here at Low-Caste Labs is actually live right now. It's free. You can go visit it. It's called the Inclusion Impact Index. You can visit that at socos.org, or you can visit one of our nonprofit partners, Start Out, at startout.org, and visit their version that specifically focuses on LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs. Our version focused specifically on female entrepreneurs. We are now working on Black entrepreneurs and refugees. We're looking to expand around the world. But what it is right now, as you arrive, is a real-time map of the United States. Every major metro in the US with a significant number of funded entrepreneurs, people creating companies. And there might be a few cities on there that you're surprised about. San Luis Obispo in California is not what people think of when they think of California Tech, or Cedar Rapids. I would like to make a joke about how many of you have visited Cedar Rapids, Michigan, but you're educators. You wouldn't fall for that. So I put this together with my team because what we wanted to show was how many jobs, how many patents, how much funding, the exits, the changes brought into a community by entrepreneurs that don't look like Mark Zuckerberg, that don't look like they come from Hollywood Central Casting's idea of what a nerd tycoon should be. And we built this to measure the impact on every community that can actually transform everyone in the community, not just you, not just people like you. Why would you say no to someone giving you or your nephew a job just because of who they loved or because the color of their skin? It's crazy. But we wanted to not only measure the real impact that amazing people were bringing into our lives, but also the difference between that impact as it truly exists today and what we know it could be. We call this the achievement gap. And just as in some of my earlier work on the tax on being different, we looked at how much it literally costs to be Joe versus Jose, to be Black versus white, to be female versus male in industry. Here we were able to look at what does it cost cities to fail to tap the full potential of every member of that community. And those are enormous numbers. One of the things we estimated from female entrepreneurs in the United States is that they would have created nearly 20 million additional jobs over the last 20 years. Not if they behaved exactly like men, but if we simply assume every major metro in the US could achieve the same level of performance, could give the same opportunity to their female entrepreneurs of the 3 best performing cities in the United States. And the same for queer entrepreneurs and the same for Black entrepreneurs. What we leave on the table is astonishing. literally thousands and thousands of patents go undiscovered every year. Billions of dollars of funding and exits, and to me, the lives transformed. If you visit socos.org/index, I believe, is it? If it's not, just socos.org and you'll arrive at the site. You can see the index, a live map that you can interact with. You can see not just the map, but other ways of exploring the data of how amazing people that are just a little bit different than our stereotypes about entrepreneurs, how amazing people are transforming their cities, but also how we could be doing so much better. And the next big stage for us is what we could do to make a change for the better. The actual policies mayors, banks, venture capitalists can put in place to transform those outcomes. I am absolutely thrilled with the life I have had the chance to lead. It had hard times, and I wouldn't have wished those on my worst enemy. But nowadays, I get to have an impact on the world. I have built AI to treat my son's diabetes and shared it freely so that other people could use it. I have built systems to predict manic episodes in bipolar sufferers. I've created jobs through my companies, tried to make transformations and publish truly novel research in education and economics and neuroscience. I've had the chance to have an impact on the world. And there's nothing about me that is remotely special. Right now, there are kids just like me that will come up with a cure, not just a treatment, a cure for my son's diabetes. They will come up with a treatment for COVID-19 and future coronaviruses. There are kids out there that will transform our worlds, but they were born in a favela in Rio. They were born in a tiny village outside Bangalore, or frankly, down the street from me here in Berkeley. And because of the world they grew up in, because of the choices that were available to them, they will never become that person. And our lives will be worse for it. There is every reason we should live in an inclusive world, that we should live in an inclusive economy. But the main one is the most selfish, because all of our children will grow up in that world. All of our children will grow up with all of the benefits of the amazing people that right now aren't getting the opportunity. And I know it's messy. You say the opportunities exist. I hope I have conveyed to you that the opportunities exist when people believe that their hard work will pay off. We call this belief-based utility. Utility is a classic economics idea, but for us, it only comes to bear if you have the evidence in your life that you can truly make that transformation. I believe every kid can do it, but it's not easy. And it won't happen simply because you create technology and you release it out into the world. It happens because you make that transformation inevitable. You build technology which can only make a life better. It is never enough to invent and lean back and think that you're a hero that has saved the day. None of us are really heroes. We're all struggling, but we have amazing opportunities. If you are on this video call, you have the amazing opportunity to transform someone's life, directly or not. So why wait? You know, I wasn't going to go into this, but I see I have just a couple of minutes left, and I love this story. You know, the world gets better when old men plant trees. It's an old saying that to me has always spoken to a simple truth about purpose. Purpose in psychological literature is about making a sacrifice, being willing to do something that's for a purpose bigger than yourself, for something that will take more than your one lifetime to complete. And what's more true to that than planting a tree under whose shade you will never rest? Instead, it's the opportunity to create a world that will be better for someone else. Someone that might be a little bit different than you, or they might not, and it doesn't matter, because you will have been the person that created something truly transformative. Please go out and make certain that the things you invent actually change a life. Go out tonight and plant a tree. The one thing that I've learned across being able to analyze hundreds of thousands of data points, the truth is the billions of data points about what truly transforms a life, is that it's you. What transforms a life is actually you seeking to become amazing, because the only path for you to have an amazing life is for you to give it to someone else. So I want all of you, hopefully, because I am selfish in my own ways, go visit socos.org, SOCOS.org, and look at the Inclusion Impact Index. And you can see all of the information about this tool and our ability to track people for now in the United States, but soon around the world. I'd also ask you to read some of the other material that's there. If you want to learn more, in fact, if you are a geeky, wonky nerd like me and you want the story behind everything I've talked about here, take a look at some of our other pieces. You will find represent with an exclamation point. You want to tackle wage gap? Pay women more and put them in positions of leadership. You are not going to hire your way out of employment bias through the mailroom. Inclusion starts from the top. So we also have the story of Joe versus Jose, the original Inclusion Impact Index analysis, which I only briefly alluded to, and so much more. You can find it all at socos.org. It's all for free. We just want to know that we're doing something that actually helps people. And I hope it inspires some of you to go out and not simply build and release, but be a part of the life cycle of the use of your projects. You have the chance to make a transformation in this world. You have the chance to give your life to someone else and plant a tree. And the best time for you to start